got so much content this morning, so it's going to be short and sharp through here. But I wanted to start with the Hawthorn Collingwood game was built up all week, and it had actually been on the horizon. The Hawks' performance at the Cats a couple of weeks ago was questionable, and they needed to stand up in a big game. And this one was, pretty much an elimination final, and they stood up in spades. I thought their small forwards were exceptional. And Jack Ginnivan, you couldn't help but be drawn to his performance against his old team. He would have been very happy with his work on the day. And they were exceptional, but he wasn't on his own. So just looking at their small forwards, Watson was the number one ranked player on the field. Dylan Moore was the third. Bruce was the fourth. McDonald was the fifth, and Ginnivan was the eighth. So their small forward batch of five.
And where was Dylan Moore in all that?
Dylan Moore was third.
Oh, third.
So they all had exceptional days. When you have 69 inside 50s and you move the ball as efficiently as they did and you look damaging out of stoppage, you're going to give your forwards plenty of supply. But we talk about the importance of small forwards in the modern game and how you can't just, we look at Myers, Close and Stengel for Geelong, for Collingwood with Hill, Ginnivan himself, and McCreary, who put that pressure on. They're up and back runners, and they help the back six defend. They help the midfield move the ball through the mid, and they finish. So, but you look at Hawthorn now, you think, well, what they have is going to be very hard to beat.
13 goals from their small forwards, and I reckon Dylan Moore has a lot of responsibility on what they have produced, because you know what it's like. You go in and one of your teammates is doing this unconditionally every week, and his work rate has been spoken about a lot. He works as hard as anyone in the game right now, and Watson comes in and goes, okay, well, if that's what Dylan Moore does, that's what's expected of me. And some of Watson's clips of how he came up, sprinted back, stayed involved in the contest, his work rate, you go, I think that's a lot to do with Dylan Moore and the example that he set. Connor McDonald comes in and goes, well, that's what Dylan Moore does. Yeah. That's what I've got to do. Luke Bruce probably hasn't played that role as high up the ground in the past, but once again, his experience in playing that role is vital for these young players. So when you're rebuilding and they cut deep, Hawthorn, but the decision to keep a couple of those experienced players around and also the emergence of Moore as a star, I think has been vital into what the rest are producing.
Well, you're probably seeing three generations in the one team, because Moore would have learnt off Bruce, and then Moore's passing it down now to a Watson and a McDonald, but and Ginnivan himself. I just thought it was compelling viewing, wasn't it?
Do you have any issue with Ginnivan grabbing the Guernsey?
No. I think he's always been a performer. Yeah, there's always been that aspect to his personality, to his character, and I think the best that cheekiness is best displayed when he's out on the football field. You're not going to win them all.
You hate booing? Did you have an issue with Collingwood fans booing him?
Yeah, I don't like booing. Full stop. I understand the theatre, but I don't like the booing. Full stop. Whether it's coming out of Collingwood mouths or out of opposition
because
mouths.
The Collingwood fans were very upset about opposition teams booing Ginnivan when he played for Collingwood. It's a little bit ironic that they were now booing him.
It's extremely ironic, but you can have it both ways, and people do choose to have it both ways. The one thing I'll say on Hawthorn before we move on is that the handball game, like you think, okay, it's a wet weather. There's a lot of performances this weekend in inclement weather that actually ask you the question about how does the game need to be played. Like they nearly went 1-for-1 handball, and they were prepared to handball in the wet, what looked like over possession, but it wasn't, because it was always moving forward. It was always creating opportunity, and they were always able to, they spread themselves enough and they were clean enough to be able to put each other in space, which I thought was huge. They would be, Hawthorn fans would be wrapped. You're just out of the 8, and there's obviously challenges ahead, but geez, they've got a bit of momentum. They're one of the better teams in the comp at the moment. Number 2 for me was the Sydney-Brisbane game, and just, is it or was it a grand final preview? Because these two teams, it wasn't necessarily high scoring, 79 points to 77, but even Chris Fagan, and obviously Rapp with the win, but even Chris Fagan was able to draw some parallels to some marquee matchups in another sport. It's pretty hard to be disappointed with anything that you saw. It reinforced Brisbane's bona fides at being able to start the season so slow and then drive their way through into the season. It's been full of merit. To go from 13th, 5 or 6 weeks ago, building the momentum again, and it just shows you how condensed the ladder has become for them to be able to push their way into third. And with a great percentage, it sets them up really well for the last 5 weeks and what they can do. Through the midfield, Neil was held relatively well. McCluggage was excellent. Bailey and Rayner are starting to get involved, through those high forwards. Rayner's finding some form at the right time. Yeah. And he definitely is a game breaker the way that he goes about it. But they've managed their own personnel issues and been able to find ways. Zorko's been awesome off the back. They didn't have Joyce filled the role of Jack Payne, and whether he may have that in front of Payne even. But so Brisbane were excellent, and Sydney didn't lower their colours. They lost players through injury. Papley will be interesting to see how that plays out. Hayward showed great courage to come back after that badly sprained ankle and still contribute in the second half. They missed Rampy. One thing on Sydney. Before 2 weeks ago, they had 16 players that had played every game for the season. And they just play their best 23 whenever they can. They push their best 23 out. 2 weeks ago, they've lost Rowbottom and McInerney to injury, and Heaney was the suspension. So 3 of those 16 dropped off. Papley is one of those players, and Hayward is another that have played every one of the games. So when you've played your best team so consistently, if you have some injuries as you go along, you're going to be bringing in players that may not have had high exposure to AFL, and there's a massive gap between VFL and AFL. So I think I asked this question about 5 or 6 weeks ago with Sydney. They've still got a lot of work to do. They've set themselves up extremely well. They're clear at the top of the ladder. Their best football is the best in the comp. That there's still going to be challenges that come their way, and the personnel challenges may or may not be a part of that.
Western Bulldogs on Sunday taking on Sydney at the SCG is a ripper. They've lost 3 games this year, Sydney. 5 points, 1 point, 2 points. They could easily be 17-0. Really.
Absolutely.
So I just you can and the game against the Saints, they kicked inaccurately and they lost to Richmond, who last on the ladder. So they could easily be 17-0. You're right, Rampy is a big out. You maybe question the height behind the ball against the big teams, and you look at maybe Carlton if they come up against them in a big final at the MCG, and also forward of the ball, can you fully rely on Amadi and McLean and Logan McDonald, who it hasn't quite worked for the majority of the year?
You're talking about Rayner on that side. The flip side and an answer to my query about Sydney is a guy like Robbie Fox, who has played. He's played 8 or 9, 10 games this year. I think he's about that. But he is a player that's been on the outside of the 23. But he can come in and he'd play a lockdown role as a forward and do you a good job, or he can come down and he play back. He can play through the midfield. So he's one of those.
He's played on Jeremy Cameron before.
He's one of those jacks of all trades that can come in and play. So he maintains the balance for the team when they might have had a few
elephant
injuries.
in the room, Bucks, is Mills. Callum Mills, the captain.
What happened?
I don't know what happened, but he came back for one and then he was managed. So I'm assuming he pulled up rough. Is Callum Mills going to be in their best team as captain when it comes to the pointy end? I'm not sure he is.
It's not as big an elephant as it might have been in other years. They've been able to perform really well without him. It would be a shame if he wasn't able to be involved. And Luke Parker, we're seeing him get more involved in this season and shown his class very quickly. So I wouldn't be disappointed if I was a Swans fan. You're in a pretty good spot.
The Bombers?
Yeah, look, the Essendon Challenge. Like it would be really easy, and I know if I'm speaking directly to Bombers fans now, I know you're disappointed, and I only need to use Sarah Jones as an example. When we went and did the game on Saturday with her, and she's coming off Friday night, and she looked shell shocked. The Bombers are still in the 8 now. The percentage isn't great, and you're only in there by a draw, but you are a game from 5th spot. It is so tight, and you've still got opportunities ahead of you. But there's no doubt that the Bombers fans, the history and the I suppose what you've endured over a couple of decades is starting to come back at you. And Brad Scott, I suppose, is the guy that's going to be guiding this club, this group of players through this next 5 weeks, because you can't just sit on your heels here. You've got to chase it. And I'm sure that Scotty's more than aware of that. Essendon had a brilliant first half to the year. And they are in a better spot than they were last year. But we remember last year they dropped right away those last 2 games. So this was always going to be the case. And there's some really important matchups coming. But they would be smarting with that result. Like, that is not a game they should have dropped.
So the question that he was responding to there was, should you be more advanced when you had only 3 players under 50 games? This isn't a young group. And eventually, Brad... was not that happy with the question, but eventually he went on to agree with the premise of the question. Should they be more advanced than where they are, and should we be expecting more from Essendon with the demographic of their list?
But I think you look at Perkins, Cox, Jones.
They've been around for a while. I know you think they're young.
They're 50, 60 game players.
Been around for a while. They're like the Sam Walshes. Like that's sort of.
But I will ask you a question. Like, when you were, I'm not defending where Essendon are, because they should have won that game. Their best football is pretty good. I'll come back to that. Tactically, they are running their wingers so hard forward. They are backing their ball use, which has been pretty good. They are running their wingers so hard forward, and they're scoring pretty well off it. But the game was so transitional up and back. And when they got a couple of goals up, they still had their wingers running forward of the ball. That they could have just shifted the mode a little to protect their back six a little more, to prevent Adelaide from being able to come back into the game. So there's maybe a tactical thing that has worked for them in one phase of the game, but it's hurting them.
At what age can you say you're not young anymore? Like, is 22 turning 23? Is that young in footy speak? I don't reckon that's young anymore. You're not 18.
I'll answer your question with a question. When you had played 60 games, and then when you went on and you were a 150 gamer, how much more advanced and how much more wherewithal did you have, and how much more consistent were your performances as an individual?
Yeah, well, it's hard. It's hard. I felt like I found my feet in about my third or fourth, probably my 4th year.
Yeah, so 4th year's taking you nearly towards 100 games. I'm not making excuses for them, because they're highly talented individuals. But as always, it's how the team is going, and it's sometimes how your experienced players are going. They took Heppel out, they took Wright out. They played with quite a younger demographic. Some of the most experienced players weren't there, and because they haven't performed. But Essendon have got some issues. Their best football is really good. I am really concerned about their ground ball in their D50. Like, Ben McKay could have been in pull your socks up, because his ground ball and his work with his hands, lack of clean hands, is costing the Bombers a lot of goals. But then he's not on his own. They're not great at being able to find time and space by hand. They're great when they can kick it through their back half. But as soon as the opposition puts pressure on them, and St Kilda will try and do that this weekend. It's not easy to go down to GMHBA. They do have a home ground advantage, even though that has waned a little. To go down in those conditions and to be so dominant was a great performance for the Dogs. Once again, they're still just outside the 8. It's getting jam-packed around there. And I probably had a couple drop out, with maybe the Suns and Collingwood are looking like they're not... They're sort of dropping a little bit off the pace, but let's have a look in 2 or 3 weeks. But the Dogs were huge. To go in with the tools that they did, Ugle-Hagan, Norton, and Darcy forward of the ball.
15 to 4 marks inside 50.
Yeah,
in those conditions.
Yeah, it's exceptional. And Ugle-Hagan's last quarter, he's making a habit of sort of 100%. Turning it on in last quarters as well. But Bontempelli's got support. Dale is an absolute A-grader off the back, and sides are looking at him to what they do. There's no better extractor than Libba. We talk about Matt Rowell over the time, and the guys that can get in and under and get the ball out. Libba is as clean and sharp with his hands as ever. Ed Richards is turning into a legitimate A-grader, and Adam Treloar's been there all along. So that's just through the midfield. And then you've got some young running players on the flanks. And who would have thought that Rory Lobb would go behind the ball and be significant in those roles? So he's and Buku Kama. So they've created this balance and this system that seems to be working for them. And
How far can it take
all
them?
credit to Bevo and all credit to the coaching staff to do it. How far can it take them? Well, their recent form's been excellent. They play Sydney this week, as we've already highlighted. That's going to be a fascinating watch. And if Sydney are at all vulnerable, it'll be now.
Yep.
But back on their home deck, a couple of injuries maybe, but the Dogs have seemed to. I remember the Ross Lyon mantra, anyone, anywhere. Like when St Kilda were at their peak and at their best, and when they were taking on any team anywhere. I think the Bulldogs are starting to look and feel like that, like they're just an anyone, anywhere team. And yeah, it'd be really interesting to see what the next 5 weeks looks like.
All right, you want to talk about the Blues?
Yep. I know in particular I want to talk about Harry McKay and his concussive episode. So he copped one. It looked like he was dazed and should have been taken off the field.
He's absolutely out of it.
Play had stopped. So in the end, he kicks in the next 3 or 4 minutes. The Carlton doctor's down the race. He kicks a goal in that next 3 or 4 minutes. It's not the point. But in that 3 or 4 minutes, anything can happen with a player who is dazed and confused, or not quite at now. Whether at 95 or 90 or 50% of your mental faculties and your awareness and like you can put your foot. He could. What if he goes and puts his foot down and does an ACL in a contest, or he cops another knock? I would reckon it's this point. This point to me is significant. I would believe that the guys that are in the class actions at the moment, and I've read through their stuff, they're not complaining about the game that they played. They're complaining about how they were managed around that game through head trauma. This is so obvious. The AFL need to act on this now. If you're waiting for doctors to come out, and you're like, so the Geelong doctor goes out for Jeremy Cameron. How you going? Yeah, thumbs up. I'm right. If you're waiting for the doctors and you're waiting for on-field assessments, you're going to keep players out there for the 2, 3 or 4 minutes. It happened with Dawson, I reckon, or even though Adelaide...
So what should have happened here? The umpires should have stopped play.
You've got spotters in the crowd.
Send him off.
The umpires have got earpieces in. The game should not have restarted. I think the umpire needs to be given the call from the spotter. There is a HIA here that we're not waiting for the club to make the call. That player needs to go off before play starts. And that's in Harry McKay's best interest. It's in Carlton's best interest. It's in the game's best interest. Now, if he goes off, has a quick look, and then doctor and he goes back on in 2 minutes in a rotation, that's fine. But you cannot restart the game if a player has quite obviously been concussed. The umpires might not see it, but a spotter in the crowd will, an AFL spotter, and they already exist. The fact that Harry McKay was able to play that next 3 or 4 minutes before going off to get checked, that's a loophole that needs to be closed.
I would be shocked if there wasn't a concussive episode there. I mean, just review the footage and you can see he's completely dazed. He gets up and he's not sure on his feet. Yep, then he comes to and he gathers himself in the next couple of minutes, and he does kick a goal. They did take him off and they cleared him, didn't they? Because he was ready to come back on. But
after
so if the AFL don't, I would be really surprised after the Aaliyah issue from last year, which was far more obvious than this one. But it's clear for all of us to see. I'd be shocked if the AFL doesn't sanction Carlton for this and seriously investigate what went on yesterday, because it was as clear as day that there was a serious head issue.
So we're going so hard at like a Bedford tackle or a Cameron tackle, and and we've seen a Keys on Caldwell on Friday night. Like, so we're seeing this. We're trying to change the way the game is played to mitigate against head trauma. The main issue on head trauma is when someone has had one. Let's look after that. That's the main issue. That was the main point of contention with the guys that have got this class action. Don't change the game. Change the way you manage the injuries around the game. So this is a gap. It's a loophole. It is something that it's a quick fix. It cannot be left the way it is. Every one of the players around the contest, Carlton teammates included, and the umpire knew that what had happened, knew what had to happen, but then the game continues 5 seconds later. there needs to be a process and a procedure put in place, and that's what you want to focus on, not how
I'm
players
with you, Bucks.
tackle.
I'm absolutely with you. 47-9. Clearances 47-16. I have been a critic of Jackson and Darcy. Yesterday it worked, although the proviso to that is that it was up against Harrison Petty and Van Rooyen, so it was always going to work. And you've also been a critic of the effectiveness
Just
of
ruckman.
rucks.
And so what Simon spoke about there, like, so he's got a ruckman, the guy that is closest to a ruckman in Tom Fullerton on his list, but is choosing the around the ground game in front of that. And I think that's the right decision. If you put a ruckman by name in, but he's not ready, and he's not ready to compete in all facets of the game, outside of just the ruck role, then that's probably the way to go. They were, just as a point of reference, they were in round 12. Gawn did play, and Darcy and Jackson did play. And they matched up hit ups, so it was hit outs 32-31. So it was +1 to Freo in hit outs, but they got outscored by 8 goals at stoppage. They only got outscored by 3 goals at stoppage yesterday. So
is this you defending your position?
No, well, it's no,
on your,
it's, no,
on
no,
your
I'm
belief that you don't rate rucks?
just reading out some facts here. So with or without Gawn, they got smashed. So the consistent things with Fremantle v Melbourne in those games were Sarong and Young and Fife in the first game and Brayshaw in this game. So their midfield absolutely obliterated the Melbourne midfield. So the ruck stuff can come and go. And
Make it easier, though, to have a competitive ruck like Brodie Grundy, who they had stitched up for 4 years, who they've given to a premiership contender for free, and now the point where they don't even have belief in a ruckman to win at VFL level, let alone at AFL level. And Max Gawn is 32 and coming towards the end with his body.
got it. That's one side. What about the other two? How did you find Darcy and Jackson?
I mean, they did what you would think they would do. I didn't think they were great around the ground. They dominated the stoppages and the hit-outs as they would against one of the least competitive players in the league right now, and that's Harrison Petty. So I'm not sure this is the game to judge whether Jackson and Darcy is working. And my criticism around this is the 7 years you've given to Darcy after this year and the $2 million you're paying in 2 rucks. They still would have got the same result with one of those 2 ruckmen. They don't need both of them. They could have got 2 first-round picks for Darcy and used that in other areas of their list that would be beneficial. So let's judge this in 4 years' time, not against Melbourne, who didn't have a ruckman. So anyone suggesting, oh, geez, the critics of Darcy and Jackson have egg on their face. No, they don't. Let's judge it in 3 or 4 years' time.
I'm not saying the critics, they're saying you, but anyway.
Yeah, well, no, I heard Kingy at halftime say there's been a lot of criticism of Darcy and Jackson. Well, no, it's really
Actually,
just me.
You mentioned Kingy. Like, he's been a critic of Freo's ball movement. They are a top 4 side at scores from back half and have been for the entirety of the year. Yes, they had a good day yesterday, and it was the best of the year, but they have been a top 4 side from scoring from back half. So the criticism about
that's been consistent with their ball movement.
Top 4. So that's
Can they win it?
Yeah, they can.
The premiership?
Yeah, I think they can. They still need to perform consistently on the G against the best sides, and we don't really get to see that until September. But with their midfield, with the run that they've got off the back, when Frederick and Switkowski are both playing, they are a really dangerous side. Should Eric Hipwood have had something to answer for the contact against Nick Blakey?
And he should.
Right.
That was one of the more dangerous things I've seen this year. And if you're going to suspend Toby Bedford, and I don't care about the matrix and what it looks like, and there was no concussion, so the impact won't be severe and all that rubbish that you put into the matrix. This was one of the most dangerous things I've seen on a football field. It was a tunnelling action in a marking contest. Blakey came down awkwardly, could have easily fallen on his neck. The umpire unforgivably didn't even pay that as a free kick. Not just one umpire, there's 4 out there, missed that as a free kick, so that they would need to have a look at themselves. The AFL can't accept this, and yes, Eric Hipwood should be suspended for a lengthy amount of time, regardless of the matrix, for that action. 2
more quick ones. Are you happy with the Keys on Caldwell decision, the tackle?
Yes, 100%. Nothing to answer.
And if he had have been knocked out, if he had have been concussed, would he have been okay?
No, he would have been suspended, which would have been the wrong call.
I don't know if he would have because both arms weren't pinned.
I understand that, but they would have said it was unreasonable and careless and all
Rough
of that.
conduct.
Rough conduct, so and impact. But that was the right call.
So the outcome...
Yeah, we know that.
Fuels the action.
Well, the Dangerfield tackle on Sam Walsh was far more dangerous than Bedford and what he did. Yeah, so, like
did you see Bedford? Did you see Bedford when he stuck a tackle and put his arms straight out like that? But if you slow mo it, his arms go out after the player has landed on the ground. So the AFL would have argued against that. The last one, Liam Ryan on Stocker. So nothing to see there.
I was surprised he got off.
And if he went for that. So did you think there was some intent on...
No, I just thought he elected to bump. He got him high.
He braced. The AFL said that he braced.
Well, the brace is the same as a bump. I was try and spot the difference between a brace and a bump. I can't. I thought it was inconsistent. And once again, if he was concussed, Liam Ryan would be missed for 3 weeks. But he's not concussed, so he's fine. This is a bizarre system that we all live in.